Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Pregame Show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it is time to preview the Knicks' upcoming matchup, this time on Monday night in Houston against the Rockets, a rematch of the 1994 NBA Finals, which is what it will always mean to me anytime the Knicks head down to Houston. The Rockets come in at 3-3, just had an overtime loss the other night against the Golden State Warriors, and where we usually go for all of our Rockets information and preview an interesting team in a loaded Western Conference. Roosh Williams, how are you doing, man? We're in a bit of a rush this morning because of some time constraints, but I actually forgot to ask, where do I introduce you from? What do I say you're up to? So if you wouldn't mind telling the people what's going on, where could they find all your work? We'll do this at the plugs at the beginning of the pod. How you doing, first of all?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me. Love doing Knicks Film School stuff with you. So thank you for having me on. As I've told you before, I like the Knicks. I like it when the NBA is better, when the Knicks are good. So it's good to see the Knicks, in the mix again. Yeah, man, you can find me. I do the Rockets Talk podcast. You can find that on YouTube. It's one of the biggest Rockets podcasts out there. And these days, that's mainly what I'm doing with the Rockets. I was doing a lot of stuff on playback, but I've kind of scaled that back for being busy with life reasons. So that's mainly what I've been doing with the Rockets. So go check out the podcast. The link is in my Twitter bio at Roosh Williams. So that's where you can find me, man. But yeah, it's a beautiful day, and I'm happy to talk some Rockets and Knicks.
So this is why I make sure I do this before the pod, because I would have been like, I usually just read the Twitter bio. And I knew that there was a playback element in the past. Obviously, I knew about Rockets Talk. I wanted to make sure I got it correct, which is why we clarified at the beginning of the pod.
We used to do Rockets Watch on playback. I was doing it, we were rocking and rolling last season, but this season it's scaled down just a little bit. Sometimes life gets in the way, and so, it just is what it is.
All good. And, sometimes a loaded Western Conference can get in the way of your plans for your rebuilding team to potentially take a step forward, which is how we'll transition into Rockets Talk here on this pod. Because before the season, look, I don't have to tell you how many good teams there were in the Western Conference last year. That a 41-41 Rockets team that got really hot at the end of the season. And I don't want to say became like a Twitter darling, but like after we had our last conversation, the Jalen Green effect took over, and him really, really starting to figure himself out on the other side of the All-Star break started to happen. And it looked like they might challenge the Warriors for that 10 spot. And in reality, they would have been like a very strong 9 seed in the Eastern Conference, but they ended up missing the play-in in the West. Let's just start here. Going into this season, your expectations, do you project this team to take another step forward in a loaded West? Do you think like the play-in is a conversation? Do you think the playoffs are a conversation? What are your expectations coming into this season?
I think anything's on the table. I mean, I think because of how packed the Western Conference is, I think the range is anywhere from the playoffs. A few injuries could knock a few teams out of the playoffs, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, boom, maybe you're in play for a 6 seed, all the way down to missing the play-in. I think anything could happen. Right now, I think they're tied for 10th. We're only 6 games through the season, so it's really hard to know what that means. But
right.
But I like to hold the team to their own expectations, right? And their own expectations, their external public-facing expectations are that they expect to make the postseason, right? I don't know if they clarified whether they expect to make the playoffs or the play-in, but they expect to be alive when the regular season ends in some form or fashion, right? Before the season, I predicted 48 wins, right? They won 41 last season. So in my view, if they're going to take the kind of leap that you'd expect, I think another 7 wins is reasonable. One of the big reasons for that is that Tari Eason only played, I think, 22 games last season. And Tari Eason impacts winning straight up directly. He just does. If you watched any of that game last night, they lost to the Warriors last night. They were down by 31. And they came all the way back and took the lead. And then they ended up losing in overtime. But a big reason for them doing that was Tari Eason having probably the best game of his career. So Tari Eason, they sorely missed him last season. Amen Thompson last season was hurt for a good portion of the beginning of the season, and then he finally found his groove later. So those two just being healthy and playing by virtue of that, plus natural growth, what we saw from Jalen Green at the end of last season, which we can talk about. And then, like I said, just the natural growth of the team. I thought it was reasonable to add 7 wins from the 41 win season last season. So that's kind of where I had them. And we can kind of talk about how that's matched up to my expectations so far. Or sorry, about how my expectations have matched to the reality of what we've seen so far.
Well, and that's where it's tough, as you mentioned, the 6 games of it all, that there's not enough of a sample size yet, I don't think, at least, to see how your expectations are doing. Like I could say, oh, they're 500. It's they played 6 games. There's many teams that they haven't even played yet, and I look at, and I'm honestly doing the same thing with the Knicks, where it's like, do I look at their offensive rating and say, okay, this is what the plan was, and they're doing well? Do I look at the bench and the minutes and certain things that Tibbs is doing so far that I like, and say, okay, this is sustainable? And then the other end of like, okay, we're going to eventually need to play more than 8 guys at a certain point this season. But I look at the Rockets, and so the thing that pointed out that came out last year from our conversation was Tari Eason, and I was like, this guy's not averaging that much, but you point to him as a very important player, and I'd be very intrigued if the Knicks get to play Tari Eason at some point. And it looks like, as you mentioned, coming off his career best performance, the Knicks are going to get to play Tari Eason. That 48 win projection. How much of it is based on, and I mean, you kind of just answered it, but I want to get specific about some certain players. How much is it based on like internal growth from certain players, as opposed to like the veterans and maybe even a trade, like the outside factors come in? Like, do you see like another leap from Thompson, another leap from Jalen, another leap from Eason? Like how much is it based on the rebuilding factor of the Rockets just taking another step forward?
A lot of it really is based on that. A lot of it is based on internal growth, and then basically adding Tari Eason to the mix, and then a healthy Amen Thompson. That's kind of the formula. So, I mean, look, Jalen Green, last time we talked, Jalen Green was not playing well, right? He was having, it was at the point where it was like, do the Rockets extend him? What are they going to do with him? Is he a trade candidate? And then since that conversation, he started playing out of his mind. And in March of last season, and he's done this. So this is what's tough about Jalen Green. He's always, as a Rocket, had a really up and down, very inconsistent start to the season. And when I say start to the season, I'm talking like the first, 50 games or so, basically up to the All-Star break. And then after the All-Star break, if you talk to any Rockets fan, it's kind of his thing. He just goes off, right? And last March, it was like on a different level. It was like he looked like the next coming of Ant Edwards last March, right? Now, he carried that over into the beginning of this season, except for last night against the Warriors. He had a terrible game, and his worst game of the season last night against the Warriors. So he was like 2 of 13 and, just terrible game. But before that, he was playing like an all-star, 28 points, 4 or 5 boards, 3-4 dimes, doing it efficiently, which has been the knock on him, right? He was like 58, 59% TS. After last night's game, he's all the way back down, I think, to 53, 54% TS. So still too early to know. But a lot of it was based on, hey, you get impact players back that were missing, and then these guys are now finally coming into form and fulfilling the ceiling and the expectations. And they get an extra year under their coach, Ime Udoka, right? So and then also, sorry, another big piece to the formula was adding Steven Adams. Steven Adams, they traded for Steven Adams last season. He did not play because he was hurt. But man, he's already made a huge impact. He's only played in 1 or 2 games this season. His knee injury, he's still not, they're managing his comeback. And that's kind of disappointing because they're going to need him to do more than play once every, 3 games. But when he does play, he gives them size, rebounding off the bench. The screens that he sets really just blow things open offensively in terms of spacing. So all of that put together is kind of what I was expecting. And look, so far they're the offensive defensive rating, like who knows what it really means, right? Like they're 10th in offense right now, but that offense, when I watch it, it looks like the 20th rated offense. It does not look like the 10th rated offense. Very discombobulated offensively. Last season, they were a top 10 defense. This season, right now, they're number 10. They look like a top 10 defense this season. And we could talk about, they have like different lineups that they've kind of been shifting. There seems to be some internal, I don't know what the word is. I guess Ime Udoka doesn't seem certain internal uncertainty, I guess. And they've kind of been shape shifting with some of these lineups, and but they look like a top 10 defense, But all that being said, they're still 3-3. They blew an 18-point lead in their season opener at home to Charlotte. They could very easily be 4-2. They, like I said, were down 31 points to Golden State last night, and they came all the way back and took the lead, and then they ran out of gas at the very end. They could even be 5-1. So it's just too early to know.
So two things. The 31-point comeback of it all is why Tom Thibodeau plays his starters in 31-point lead games where the Knicks are leading by 31 points until midway through the fourth quarter, which, as much as I sweat out those minutes, where they're in Detroit the other night, the Pistons have thrown the white flag, or it seems they've thrown the white flag for the first half of the fourth quarter, and he brings Karl-Anthony Towns back in, and listen, I love Tom Thibodeau. I'm like a defender of him to an extent. That's the one thing where it's like his PTSD from the GMAC game that about. Obviously, it's a big important game. He was on the Van Gundy staff at the time, so he's like the only one to have something happen for him, and it like cause a PTSD. Like, that can always happen. I got to play till the final whistle,
Right. Yeah. Has he cited that as the reason, or is that just what you're thinking?
Yaron Weitzman put out an article that's like one of the triggers of the if sports PTSD, right?
Wow.
And then I think Josh Hart makes fun of him all the time. It's like, it's never going to get over Houston. And then there was that Dallas game where Luka had 60, 20, and 10 like 2 years ago. That was against the Knicks, where the Knicks were up by 9 points with 30 seconds left. And it's just, for the rest of his life, a 30-point comeback will always be on the table. Yeah.
The 13 and 33 is iconic. I always forget that he was an assistant for Van Gundy, so he was on that bench. I would say, let me ask: Do Knicks fans? My thinking as an outsider would be to justify that. If I had to play devil's advocate, to justify playing Cat when you're up, 20-30 against the Pistons, poor Pistons, would be that he's new and the reps matter. So you just want to get the reps in. Have him playing with the guys because things are new and you just had limited reps, basically.
It's a fair comeback. He didn't come back with Jalen Brunson. Like the reps, like it very much looked like we're going to get Cat. He was at 24 minutes. Like, we're going to get him to 30 or as close to 30 as possible. Then the line change with all the rookies happened. And as far as I know, it could have just been, he was at 9 rebounds and he wanted to get to 10. He left Josh Hart out there because they're also like a guy short, the Knicks, at the moment. Like, they made a second trade this summer, as for Cat. And it ended up being somewhat like a 3-for-1, because while Dante and Julius went out, Mitchell Robinson was injured earlier in the week. So it was almost as if they just replaced Mitchell Robinson by trading 2 other rotation spots. And then Precious Achiuwa went down. And then Landry Shamet went down. And it's like all these things that we were hoping would be in place for your 8th, 9th guys. Now he's got 6 guys he trusts, then pick a backup center, and then there's campaign. So I think it's just the nature of how short they are. Josh Hart is kind of his own backup. Mikal Bridges is kind of his own backup at the moment, which is why if this is a close game tomorrow, I expect both of them to play close to 40 minutes in a November basketball game, which is, I think, comes with the package that there's no punting of a game, even if it's November, when the long run. It's why I think the Knicks are going to be in the long run looking for wing depth as soon as possible, even if it's nothing too, they're not going to have the blockbuster trade again this year, but they're going to look for something. You had mentioned lineup tinkering that Udoka, which, look, in fairness to Tibbs, he's figuring it out. So like, him getting Cat reps may actually be on the table, that he's like, I just need to see what this looks like in other situations. And so he can be prepared for it, which is why I have a little bit of grace for him, that in this early first 20 games or so, he's figuring it out. You mentioned like Udoka figuring it out earlier this year. What are some of the lineups that you've seen that might be intriguing to a Knicks fan going into this matchup? Where it's like, oh, what's this about?
Yeah. So let me break it down for you from a high level, and then we'll zoom it down to a granular level. So last season, the best player on the Rockets was, you could take your pick between Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun, right? Van Vliet was the most consistent and obviously the most decorated. Şengün, I would argue, was the best player last season just because, I mean, he scored the most points. He had the most impressive stats. You could run the offense through him. He was getting double teamed. Like if there was a star player last season for the Rockets, it was Şengün. This season, backing up to last season, then Şengün got hurt, right? With about, 20 or so games left. And when that happened, the Rockets changed what they do to basically just going like 5 athletes on the floor, 5 out, no real rhyme or reason or rhythm to the offense, but they just played with a frenetic pace, right? And that's just kind of how they went on a 9-game winning streak, albeit against some not impressive competition, including I think the Spurs twice and the Wizards and, some really crappy teams. And then they lost, I think 5 or 6 in a row when they actually played good teams. So it was really a coin flip about what that meant, right? A lot of people thought, when they increase the pace and they take Şengün out of the game and they're defensively versatile and switchable, it's much better. We got to move on from Şengün. Also, Şengün being out of the game unlocked this new version of Jalen Green. Some people thought that. Others thought, hey, that's not the case. This season, Fred VanVleet looks like he lost the fastball. He does not look good this season. He's a game manager, right? That's just what he is right now. Stats are down across the board. The overall effectiveness just seems down across the board. I don't know. Concerning from my perspective. And then Şengün has also been off to a bad start this season. First game of the season, he was on fire. I think he had like 25 and 18 and like 5 steals, 5 dimes, some crazy stat line. Ever since then, he's been very inconsistent, very rocky. And Ime Udoka has been benching him late in games. So Şengün has been benched late in games in favor of a lineup that more so mimics what they did when he went down last season. And so that lineup can look anything like any combination of Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Jalen Green, right? You take your pick. And that's kind of what Ime's done late in games. Last night, for example, Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün got benched, and a lineup of like Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, I think Aaron Holiday, he benched Fred VanVleet as well. Just a bench lineup brought them all the way back. And Şengün didn't play. I don't think he played. I think he played 7 minutes in the second half, and that was it. He didn't play the rest of the game. Jalen Green didn't play until a few minutes left in the fourth quarter. So that's kind of what's going on, right? There seems to be this tension between, hey, Şengün's not playing up to par. I'm going to yank him for defensive versatility. But then it leaves this big question of, well, we just extended this guy and he's supposed to be one of your star players. So like what's going on here, right? So you might see that tomorrow, or whenever the Rockets tomorrow to play.
Yeah, Monday night.
So you might see that on Monday night, right? You might see Şengün starting the game. If he's struggling, his efficiency's been way down. He's missing shots. He just doesn't. There's speculation that he's dealing with a back issue. There's photographic evidence that he's got like a wrap on his back. And he had the same issue last season. And when he goes through this issue, he loses lift and he just doesn't look as good. He's not as mobile. It's just, he doesn't look good when he goes through this. Ime Udoka in a press conference said there was no injury. So I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like the early controversy of the season. I have tried to avoid diving deep into it because it's like we're 6 games in. I'm not trying to do this right now. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, you might see if Şengün comes out slow, what they do is they'll run Jabari Smith at the 5. And then they flank him with, like I said, Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Fred VanVleet, Cam Whitmore, whatever. And they just get out and they run. But the issue is that their offense is so basic. When Şengün's in there, they basically run high screen and rolls and DHOs, or they ISO. When Şengün's out of there, they just kind of ISO and like run around. So sometimes it looks good because they're just running around, moving the ball, hitting threes. And it's like, holy shit, this is what it's supposed to look like. And then other times those shots aren't going in. They're turning the ball over. There's really no design to what they do. And it's just like, all right, this is not sustainable. So it's kind of been a tale of two sides of the Rockets.
So you mentioned the sustainability of their offense and it sounds like the style that they're playing. And I'm just going to point to some numbers that stood out to me when, going over some things before the show today that, obviously you mentioned Fred VanVleet's statistical slump so far to start this season. Knicks fans, he's shooting 28% from the field, 28% from three as well this year, but it's on 8.8 attempts per game. So it looks like he's checking them up. And then you do the same thing with Jalen Green, who's at 39%, which is probably going to attribute to a high effective field goal percentage because he's at nearly 10 attempts per game so far this season. And that seems to be a theme across the board with the Rockets, where they're currently 9th in 3-point attempts per game, but only 24th in 3-point field goal percentage this year.
I'm surprised that they're 24th because, like, I mean, I don't think anyone is shooting. What is Dylan Brooks shooting? Do you have it in front of you?
Dylan Brooks is shooting 30% from three on almost 6 attempts. So like that seems to be across the board. Like Jabari Smith is at 32%. Amen Thompson at 25%. But the Rockets seem to be just like, we're getting them up, like we're going to get up 43s, which obviously in today's NBA, that is the goal as old NBA Twitter. Maybe I might be part of it that laments the thought of all these threes getting chucked up per game.
Can I just say,
yeah,
so that conversation has like kind of come back into play, right? Because of the Celtics. I'm stunned as a Rockets fan that it's like treated as this new thing. We did that. We
the Harden, D'Antoni teams,
it's our fault. Like, I guess now that I think about it, it was almost 10 years ago. It was like 7-8 years ago. So maybe that's why people kind of forgot. But like we did that. I mean, I remember when Mike D'Antoni was the coach. Every game, the Rockets broadcast was like, oh, it's a new record in attempts, new record in combined attempts between both teams. Like, I thought the NBA had already gotten there. So maybe there was a regression that I just wasn't aware of.
I think it's multiple aspects of it because like the pace and space of the Suns was also a D'Antoni innovation. And it wasn't until the Warriors had an unstoppable thing and a really unstoppable player in Steph Curry that it was like, all right, every center is now going to be taught to shoot threes. Yep. I can even go to that Knicks team in 2013 with D'Antoni that set the NBA record for threes made in a season. And that record's been broken dozens of times since then by multiple teams. And it really just become the extreme has now set the standard, which is what the Celtics are. They're an extreme version of what those Rockets teams were. They're 6 games into the season, averaging 51 attempts per game, which is why I think it's like, I agree with you. I go back to like, that was a Daryl Morey thing that he would go on Bill Simmons' pod and say like, I predict we're all going to be shooting threes, 40 to 50 threes a game in the future. And then once the Celtics created what they're created, it's like, all right, well, that's the only way we're going to be able to potentially compete with it. So yeah, but continue.
No, it's just, I when I see it, I'm like, wait, have I just not been paying attention? Because I thought this was a discussion and we've like already accepted that this was the NBA. It does make me old man shake my fist though, because I miss the game when it was a little more than that. But
I also miss the athleticism of the NBA as well.
Yeah. I mean, dude, you got like the whole Ant thing, right? You got the most athletic, amazing basketball players in the world just like playing horse out there. It's like,
bingo. Yeah. Draft is gone. Math is in. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately. To your point, the Rockets are 29th in pace. Okay. A lot of Rockets fans, and Ime Udoka himself, they want the Rockets to play faster, which I don't think would be a bad idea. But I think Rockets fans have this weird kind of notion that like playing faster can substitute simply being good at offense, when I don't think that's the case, right? Playing faster can supplement certain things that you do, but it's not a replacement for having a design and a go-to base offense that works. The most important stat, though, is that the Rockets are 29th in TS percentage. I didn't look at effective field goal percentage. Excuse me. I'm using NBA.com, but I bet that they're also 29th or close to it in effective field goal percentage. So, which is why I said
28th. You're right.
28th, which is why I said, I don't know how they're 10th in offense. I really don't. I have no idea. They are so inefficient.
Well, it's offensive rebounding. That's why they're like first in offensive rebounding. So they're getting, I know this very well from the Thibodeau, Mitchell Robinson era, that it was like where it's not necessarily that we're going to maximize the first shot on this possession. We're going to get so many attempts on this possession, which is why I'm so intrigued by this matchup, because the Rockets from the statistical profile, they're a team that gets multiple attempts on a possession, but it all seems to lead to a three. They're first in the NBA in field goal attempts per game, but a lot of them seem to be threes. If you could speak to the eye test there and how that might match up.
Well, I mean, it's just weird. We don't really have mid-range players. We have Şengün, right, who will post you up and get to the basket. And a lot of what he does is he'll miss a shot and he'll rebound it and he'll put it back up and he'll rebound it and he'll put it back up and then he'll make it. Or Amen Thompson will crash the weak side and grab an offensive board. Or Jabari Smith will do the same. Tari Eason is also notorious for missing layups and getting his own rebound and putting it back up a few times until he finally makes it. So there's some of that. But yeah, I mean, look, the reason that this whole Şengün tension, in my opinion, has kind of risen and has become a thing is because Ime Udoka wants them to play. Like the starting lineup is basically Şengün, and then we play 5 out, right? You might see some pick and roll with Fred VanVleet. You might see Jalen Green handle the ball with Şengün setting a high screen and then letting Jalen kind of do what he wants to do. But the fundamental idea is Şengün posts up, and then you got shooters with big quotation marks around the word shooters. But no one can shoot, right? Jalen has been the best shooter, I think 39%, like you listed. But historically in his career, he's not a good 3-point shooter. He's just shooting well right now, which is great. But Fred missing, Dylan missing, Jabari Smith missing. So we have this offense where in theory, everyone's spread out and capable of shooting, right? Fred VanVleet, typically a good 3-point shooter. Dylan Brooks, decent enough. Jabari Smith, the shooting simply has not been as advertised as an NBA player, which is a huge issue for me personally. So like in theory, Ime Udoka is like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And it looks like players have been given the license to shoot. Like Amen Thompson will shoot a 3. And I'm just sitting there like, brother, that's not your game, right? Last night, they're down like 3 or 4 in overtime to the Warriors. And the Warriors are very clearly sagging 6 feet off of Amen Thompson, right? With good reason. And he just whips a 3. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? So you'll see these box scores like last night against the Warriors. Amen Thompson, 8 of 15, 18 points, which that's not bad. But if he was more selective about how the shots he takes, he'd be much more efficient. So he kind of will shoot. It's like he's been given a license to shoot from the perimeter. And I think that extends to everyone on the team. So I think it's philosophically what Udoka wants to do. And look, he's a competitive guy. Maybe he's looking at Joe Mazzulla in Boston and he's like, yeah, let's be that. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some influence there. And the Rockets have always been analytically driven. So I think that, like I know that the Rockets, for example, have put a very heavy focus on Jalen Green shooting 3s, right? I remember with some sources that I spoke with in the past, I was like, hey, Jalen looks like a typical mid-range type player who can also extend to the 3-point line. And they were like, no, we want him shooting 12 or more 3s a night. And I was kind of like, what? But that matches with the eye test, right? So I think that's philosophically what they want to do. I just don't think they have the shooters to execute it. And I would, a lot of Rockets fans would love to see them be more creative with the offense, right? Use cutters. Like they have athletes, they have guys who can cut and be devastating off the ball. Tari Eason, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, Cam Whitmore, all these guys are good cutters and can finish, but they use their players as standstill shooters, and they do a lot of ISO. So it's a really unimaginative offense. The honeymoon it's not over for Ime Udoka. I love Ime Udoka. A lot of Rockets fans love Ime Udoka. He's transformed this team, and that's the reason that the defense is what it is. However, the next step for Ime Udoka in Houston is the offense has to get a little more creative because it's just too basic.
So I wonder, and this will be kind of the last thing before we transition into some Knicks talk, but like I go back to this through the Tibbs tenure. I have to apply it through that vantage point that like year one, we were just happy that they were good and we were impressed that he was able to be the head coach of a team that was projected to win 22 games, ended up winning 41 during that COVID shortened season. And, it was very basic. It was a really good bench. It was a lot of Julius Randle in the mid range. And then the second year happens and the floor kind of falls out. And like that was a team that, needed to be good at defense, but you had Kemba and Fournier on the floor at the same time, Julius Randle with some regression. But the plan was still in place. And we saw it that first Jalen Brunson year that it wasn't necessarily going to be an efficient offense. It was going to be a lot of isolation to limit turnovers, but we were going to have an effective offense. And they finished top, depending which site you use, top 2 or 3 in offense because of the offensive rebounding. And I wonder if that's like Udoka's thought is like, I'd rather be more effective than efficient. Maybe we could be more creative with ball movement and getting more people involved. But from what you're telling me, I mean, it sounds like everybody has the freedom to shoot, and they're aiming to get as many threes up as possible. Which is like going into this game, just as a Knicks fan projecting, like if the Rockets get 43s up, it's basically a 3-point variance game. Like they're going to get a ton of offensive rebounds because they've gotten at least, seems like, yeah, I'm looking at it now, 18 each of the last 2 games, 16 and 23 in 2 other games that they played. So like the Knicks being a team that prioritizes, like it's Josh Hart's their rebounder. Obviously, Cat can get you boards, but like they're prioritizing the first shot now at this point. That it sounds like Udoka's sticking with like a template that's like, this will work once we get the right personnel, and the personnel just hasn't lived up to that template yet. And there's that push pull in the fan base of like, all right, change the template. And he's like, no, like this will work eventually when I have the right personnel. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's right. And if you look at it, so last season, I forget where they finished, but they were one of the better teams at limiting turnovers. This season so far, I use NBA.com again. I believe they are 4th best at limiting turnovers. So maybe you can confirm that. So you are correctly speaking to that. And I think that, yeah, in terms of the template, it looks like he's got this way he wants to play. And he's making the guys play that way. And they have a lot of personnel that can play that way, minus the actual ability to shoot, of course, or to make the shot. So that's the missing piece. But yeah, I mean, you're one of your better offensive players, if not your best or your second best offensive player, is Alperen Şengün. And that, like, you can use him to generate those shots. But if the idea is to just post him up and then kind of see what happens, I don't know. Guys got to cut, right? Like you watch Denver, you even watch some of these new sets that Redick is implementing with the Lakers, and the Rockets are just so predictable that, I think the idea is, hey, if you just make your shots, we'll win the game. But at some point you have to kind of cope with the fact that you don't really have guys who can shoot at a competitive level with relative to other guys in the NBA. So I think you characterized it correctly. And look, they could easily be 5-1 right now. So maybe he's not wrong. But I just do think that at some point, like Jabari Smith, he's been struggling, right? And you can go look at the catch and shoot numbers from last season. I think he was like 38, 39% catch and shoot 3. So it's not like he's a bad catch and shoot 3-point shooter. However, when you just watch him, you can tell that he seems to be much better when he's moving for whatever reason, right? And they have not experimented or explored at all the idea of, running Jabari Smith through a couple screens just to catch and shoot and reposition. And that's one example, right? Of the personnel, of not matching, the style to the personnel. So yeah, I do think he needs to get a little more creative. And that was one of my big keys entering the season, was kind of monitoring, like, all right, what's Udoka going to do? But it seems with each passing game, it seems to become a little more clear that he's got his idea and he wants his guys to fit, that idea.
Is Steven Adams going to play in this game on Monday night?
It's always a game time like notification with him. So I hope so. He did not play last night against the Warriors. He did play, I believe, against Dallas, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope he plays. But it's not for certain.
That would somewhat dictate. Will you tell me, like, how many minutes was he playing? Let's start there in the
let me take a look. I don't have it memorized, but I want to say no more than 15.
So he's a backup center is basically what you're saying. Yeah. So I guess that wouldn't necessarily dictate my confidence as a Knicks fan going into this, because it's if the possession battle becomes a thing and the Rockets are going to try and not beat the Knicks by the 3-point variance, like if they're off from 3 tonight, I'll feel a little more confident in the game. But if they're hitting their threes and they're getting offensive rebounds, then I don't know how effective the Knicks are going to have to be, or really specifically efficient the Knicks are going to have to be in order to win a game like this.
He's played 2 games. He played 14 minutes against the Spurs, and he played 10 minutes against the Mavs.
Not to dismiss the 15 minutes that those minutes, but look, I respect Steven Adams, wanted him to be the Knicks backup center at a certain point this offseason when they were trading, when they lost Hartenstein and then lost Mitch. I was like, would have been great if we could find a backup center on this market. And then they went and found Karl-Anthony Towns instead. I wouldn't discount the idea of a guy like Jock Landale who might become available. He's not great, but he's not bad. Well, I think the Knicks plan right now for backup center is, it's a rotation of Precious Achiuwa, when he comes back, is either your backup 5 or your backup 4. Jericho Sims has been the backup 5 at the moment, and
Texas.
There you go. Ariel Hukporti, who was the last pick in the NBA draft, has actually looked pretty competent in his minutes. And then like Mitch, when he comes back, potentially could be the backup center. Which, look, I do want to get your take on what the Knicks did this offseason. And
let's talk some Knicks. I'd love to.
So I was fine at the end of last season running it back if they can get Hartenstein to turn down a bag from whomever. And obviously that started to...
Did you not have the ability to throw him that bag? You didn't have bird rights or anything?
There's a rule in the NBA that if you sign a guy to a less than 2 years or less, that you're capped at what you can offer him when you re-sign him for that, like after that 2-year contract, or even an extension, you're capped at 125% of what his contract was. This, like it handcuffed the Knicks, but it stops someone like Luka can't sign like a 1-year deal for the minimum, right? So to get someone else to come in, and then you just extend him off of that. Like your early bird rights create, like the NBA has, it's actually a decent rule in play that goes back to the 80s. But in this specific situation, it handcuffed the Knicks that they signed a guy in Hartenstein to be a backup center to a very good deal. And he played himself into the value of a $30 million one. It happened with Bruce Brown in Denver as well, where they were like, "Oh, we'd love to have you back as a rotation piece." They were capped at what they could give him, and Indiana threw him a bag. So that's the nature of it. But I was like, fine if they could convince him to turn down said bag, and they came with the max they could offer him, which was 4 for $72, I believe. And he obviously got what he got from OKC. And when it was clear they weren't going to be able to run it back, then they made one trade for Mikal Bridges. Then right before training camp, they made another trade for Karl-Anthony Towns. And here we are with this version of the Knicks. Just your perspective, like your reaction to the first trade and then the second trade, and like what's your your projection for the Knicks and what they could potentially be this year.
So, okay. The Mikal Bridges trade I was kind of blown away because obviously there's, the Rockets had the Nets picks and there was a lot of talk of like, the Rockets had legitimate interest in Mikal Bridges, right?
Uh-huh.
And a lot of times when the Rockets were, at least when fans, and even if you talk to certain people within the organization, when you're talking about, hey, what are some potential trade scenarios? Mikal Bridges' name always came up, right? So it just made sense. So to see him go for the price that he went for was slightly stunning. I was like, whoa, that is an overpay. Now, that being said, sometimes you overpay to build the team you want, right? I think from a basketball perspective, I love it. I think he fits perfectly, right? He's versatile. You got 2 of the best 3-and-D wings on the market, right? With him and OG. And so you put him and OG together and then you surround Brunson with that. I thought that was awesome. I thought Julius Randle was always that inconsistent, like, does he fit? Is he the guy that's going to take them to a title contender level? Or is he just like a notch below or a couple notches below that? So moving him for Cat, I thought was really interesting. Throwing DiVincenzo in the mix probably hurts. I'm sure he's one of those where like Knicks fans were like, God damn, do we have to throw in Dante?
Yeah.
And obviously your bench is now a little, thinner because of that. And the whole Villanova thing is, the glory of that is not ruined, but lessened. But look, man, top talent works in the NBA. I've always been skeptical of Cat. I think a lot of people have. I would not want that contract on my books. However, if Cat was to work, I think it would work if you surround him with some dogs, right? And I think you got Mikal Bridges, you got OG Anunoby, you got Jalen Brunson, and who am I missing?
Josh Hart.
Josh Hart. You got Josh Hart, right? So like, I think that works, and it looks like it's starting to work. And you can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But yeah, I mean, you have 2 guys who can be go-to 20, 30-point scorers at any given time with Brunson and Cat. You have shooters around the horn with Brunson, Cat, Bridges, not Josh Hart,
Anunoby,
yeah. And Josh Hart can shoot decent enough to be there.
It's his willingness to shoot that's the question.
The problem,
yeah, because it like the career 34% shooter, I believe, from 3, but there's this pump fake that you're going to see it a couple times where teams will probably put their work. I'm curious what the Rockets do as far as who they match up. That's been the conversation in Knicks land, that like a willingness to shoot from Josh Hart actually makes the Knicks pretty effective. Him cutting into like him doing these 45 cuts or just like cutting out of space. So that way, like it creates open looks for others. It also creates rebounding opportunities. Like he basically has to be moving at all times to justify other teams putting their worst defender on Josh Hart like he's a center.
Okay.
But we'll see what this matchup presents.
I've seen clips where he's used as a screener a lot.
Yeah. Bringing him over into the action. Yeah.
Right. And then he pops out and it allows, maybe it's because he's the worst shooter of the starters. Maybe it's like you're saying, he's not willing to shoot. Maybe it's both. I don't know. But it seems like him as the screener allows, the defender switching to basically ignore him or at least cheat over and crowd the space of the ball handler. Right. And just kind of focus on whoever the ball handler is, wait for the ball to swing over to Hart, help back. And then by that time, it seems like your offense is a little bit stifled. So that's kind of one thing I've seen. But again, like you said, the fix to that is to move around. I mean, people make fun of me on Rockets Twitter because I won't get into why, but they make fun of me for promoting the idea of moving around and cutting. Right. And it's funny because it's just such a fundamental thing to basketball, but it's also a weapon, man. Like if you run around, people don't like to chase guys who run around. I mean, it causes disruption. Now you can't just run around for no reason. You have to have some intention with how you're cutting. But if you know how to find space, how to cut to space and drag defenders with you, like you can be very effective. And if you do that around four shooters, like that's there's no better setup than that, right? So all that being said, I like what the Knicks did. I do think you need depth, and that's going to be the issue. Is Mitchell Robinson expected to make a return?
It's a January expectation. And at that point, you wonder if he's an effective backup center or if he's the salary you use to get someone. I don't even know what that name even looks like at this point. Not even someone as a center, because they have someone like Precious Achiuwa who can be an effective backup. Can they find a 4 or a 3 that... Look, they're kind of out of picks at this point. They have this protected Washington pick, which I love how for years I was told like all the Knicks protected picks that they traded for a couple of years ago were like, oh, those picks mean nothing and they wouldn't get us Donovan Mitchell. And yet one helped us get Mikal Bridges, one helped us get Karl-Anthony Towns. And now I'm like, all right, I guess I need to value this Washington pick, even if it is just eventually 2 seconds. Which what it converts to when the protections are eventually up.
Did you get that pick from OKC?
Yeah, it's all 3 of the.
That pick came from us.
So that might have been from the Russ trade. Okay.
So I think yes, I think we got that pick from Westbrook. I'm pretty sure we did, and it's like it's a first that's protected unless they make the playoffs or something like that, right? So it's like
it's top 14. Yeah, it's lotto protected. Yeah,
so it's lotto protected. For like all the way through, I don't know, 2028 or something. And then if it doesn't end up conveying at that point, it converts, to like a couple second round
2
picks.
seconds. Yeah.
We took that pick and we coupled it with another pick and we traded that to OKC to draft Alperen Şengün. That's where that pick came from.
Okay. So the timeline of how that pick eventually found its way to the Knicks is so it came from
Russ John Wall trade to the Rockets. Rockets traded it with another pick to OKC to draft Şengün. OKC then traded it to y'all to move up and draft Ousmane Dieng or something like that.
The Knicks traded down from I'm trying to remember. Ousmane Dieng was the pick in their slot, and they did trade it. They ended up taking Jalen Williams with J-Dub. So that is a what if that a lot of Knicks fans go to. The Knicks were trying to clear cap space. I'll say that. Like they wouldn't have been able to sign Hartenstein. They eventually signed Jalen Brunson. And this is where Mark Cuban being like, screw your sign and trade. I'm not doing it. And the Knicks like, okay, well, we'll just clear cap space then. Made them have to be a little more creative than what they did that off season. Yeah. I like it. But that's any draft where you're like, I didn't know that this 12th pick was going to be better than what a 12th pick usually is.
The Rockets took, I think, Marcus, one of the Morris twins. I always forget which one. Over Kawhi, one pick over Kawhi, right? So it's like
there's a lot of those.
It happens. But look, all that being said, I think the Knicks needed just more star power, right? Like at the end of the day, this is the NBA. When it gets to the playoffs, Jalen Brunson can't do it all, and Julius Randle was nice. Dante DiVincenzo's nice. Those are good players. But you need someone who can, go out there and score. What did Cat score the other night? 44 points.
44 in Miami. Yeah.
Right. So you need that. And ideally you need two guys who can do that. And you guys have that. And then when you have those two guys, what else do you need? You need defensive versatility. And you have two of the best at it, right? 6'7", 6'8", switchable defenders who can both hit a three. Bridges and Anunoby. The last thing you need is a little bit of depth. It'll matter less in the playoffs. You need it to get through the slog of the regular season, right? So to answer your question, I love what the Knicks did. I mean, I always say it when I come on here, people might think I'm full of shit, but I just if I had to pick a non-Rockets team to win it all, I think I'd pick the Knicks. I'm just looking by the way, I didn't realize Cleveland was 7-0. I don't know how I'd missed that.
Yeah, they had. There are some impressive wins on there. They played the Magic the first game after Paolo. The Knicks game, the Knicks saw against them. They looked impressive enough that I could say that 7-0 is not fraudulent, if with a little bit of early schedule luck. But look, as someone who predicted them to finish top 4, I think that top 3 or 2 even might even be the calculation there.
I think you guys are talented enough to give Boston, it's basically, in terms of sheer talent, I think it's you and Boston. We'll see if Cleveland can break through. They always kind of don't for some reason, right? I think they're just missing something. But if I had to pick someone to win it all, just out of favoritism or, who I'm rooting for, you guys and the Kings ain't going to do it, right? So, so that's how I feel. I like what you've done. If you get a little bit of depth, you'll be scary. Can I ask you how you feel about Cat? And also, there was a lot of talk about Mikal Bridges changing his 3-point form or whatever, and that seems to be a total non-story now. So that was another thing I wanted to ask about.
So I'll answer one at a time. The Cat trade, I was very into the idea of the Villanova Voltron that they created, going all in on the power of friendship. It was and I've always been a Julius Randle defender as well. So it was now it's Jalen Brunson and multiple shooters. It's also putting 4 shooters around Julius Randle if you want to play him at the 5 or Anunoby at the 5, and you just you create a modern version of that Warriors death lineup from 2015, not the Kevin Durant version, but the one with Iguodala and Harrison Barnes. And while Jalen Brunson's not Steph Curry, he is an MVP candidate, and it's a death lineup light, And I spent all off season just kind of talking myself into that. And then they made the Cat trade, and the Julius Randle defense is now over, and it's a guy in Cat who, I was never a fan of, and it's been amazing to watch these last 2 games. And it's people called this guy soft, and people called this guy this, and said he wasn't tough. And it's guys, it's been 2 games. This is going to matter in the playoffs. I still have those questions, but I've obviously always thought he was offensively talented, and I think I'm giving it an open mind. I'm coming to it with an open mind that there's just going to be a really high ceiling with this offense that will matter a lot during the regular season, and we'll see what happens in the playoffs. The Mikal Bridges of it all is so funny to me, because you're right that there was clearly a hitch added to his shot, and you asked him about it. He was, I'm working on some things, and it felt like I'm a big baseball fan. Mm-hmm. You get to spring training and you're I'm going to work on launch angle this spring training. Right.
Or Justin Verlander found what's wrong with the mechanics.
Right. I'm working on my mechanics here, and I'm experimenting with a slider, when I've never thrown a slider in my career. And it might lead to some awful numbers, and to the fans and to some in the media, they'll be oh my gosh, has he lost it? And then you go back to the stuff that works come the season. It's oh no, it's spring training. It doesn't matter. Mikal Bridges had 5 rough preseason games, a bad first half against the Celtics, and since then is like flirting with a 64 true shooting. It really was nothing. Yeah. And to your point, it's not just NBA Twitter and people on the outside that did this. I had Knicks fans texting me that are more casual than others that are did we just trade 5 picks for a guy that's got a hitch in his shot? And it's give it a week, give it 2 weeks even. It will be okay. And here we are. It's like, yeah, he figured it out. Like, I expected a guy with a career 37% 3-point shooter to eventually figure it out, which, I think that was more a media story or an anxiety. And this is really where I come from. And I think I do represent a lot of Knicks fans, is that we're past the stage of like, oh, these cute regular season teams were fun. Like I had so much fun watching last year's team that just kept overachieving and like working hard. And if we got a 4 seed or a second round playoff exit, we'd still be proud of that team. Now you've gone all in, and it's like, if you don't end up playing Boston and giving them a run for their money in the conference finals, it might be looked at as a disappointing season. And any anxiety that comes with that expectation is where freaking out over Mikal Bridges' shot, or whether or not Cat is, the guy to take you over the hump, is warranted.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a good place to be, though, right? Because that means the expectation is contender. It means you've built one, and if it doesn't pan out to it, then that's where the disappointment sets in, of course. But like I said, I mean, on paper, I hope and expect you guys to go to the conference finals against Boston, but it's so funny. The Mikal Bridges thing is so funny to me, because like, I play basketball regularly. I'm just an average Joe, right? So whatever. But it's just funny to see the folks that you can tell don't play basketball at all and what they obsess over. That's always just something I find so funny. And you see Bridges and the hitch, and everyone's like, oh my God, Rockets fans told me we should trade XYZ for this guy to blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, he's shooting 38, 39% from three. He's scoring 17, 18 points a game. He looks, from what I can tell, he looks like Phoenix Mikal Bridges, right? Like, he looks exactly as
all advertised. They need. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was going to say also, another interesting thing about this Rockets-Knicks matchup is that you have two of the best 3-and-D guys in the league, right? As I've said, OG and Mikal Bridges. We have some pretty damn good ones too. So it's going to be like a menacing 3-and-D. Ours lack the 3, so to speak, right? So like, they're 3-and-D in nature and theory, but go back and watch the second half of the Warriors game, if you want, where the Rockets made their comeback, and you'll see Tari Eason and the menace that he is. And you'll see Amen Thompson and the menace that both of those guys are, and to a lesser degree, Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith isn't like a menace on defense, but he's got a high floor on defense. He's competent as like a switchable 5. But Tari Eason and Amen Thompson, those two guys are ridiculous. I mean, they are, to me, all defense level type players. And they're both, 6'7". I think they're both 6'7", actually. Tari Eason 7'2" wingspan, huge hands. Amen Thompson, I think, is like a 7'1" wingspan. So it'll be interesting. We'll have like a lot of 3-and-D, or at least a lot of D on the court. So,
well, I look forward to this matchup on Monday night, because the last time these two teams played each other, a controversial foul on a 3 by Jalen Brunson was called.
That was total bullshit.
I agree, but I remember your message after the game being exactly like, that call was total bullshit. And
total bullshit.
The tough part is, I was ready to leave that game impressed with the young Rockets and their depth and their hustle and their play style.
And it left a bitter taste in your mouth.
I can't think about that at all, because one of the worst calls.
You know what the funniest part is?
Yeah.
Is they gave the call to Aaron Holiday.
Yeah.
Like, even, they gave 6 foot tall Aaron Holiday on that call on like, what was like a fadeaway 3 or something from like 20 something feet. I was stunned. I remember watching that, and I was just like, oh, I'll take it. But that is such a bad call. So,
the irony of this conversation we're having, the Knicks just played the Pistons in the pregame pod that I did then. The last time the Knicks played the Pistons last year, I guess one of the last times they played the Pistons last year, there was a controversial non-call where DiVincenzo, I'll just say he ran over Asor Thompson. Okay. I believe it's the Thompson twin in Detroit, and like should have been called a foul, and it just led to a turnover. And the Knicks got the ball, had sent it to Josh Hart, and he made a layup to give the Knicks.
I remember that play.
Right, and Monty Williams is in the post game being like, New York bias, blah blah blah, and my reaction to that was like, who am I to question the integrity and decisions of a referee? In the late game situations, they do a difficult job, and we need to be more understanding. And then in this Rockets conversation, it's like, I need referee reform. What is this happening? They need more accountability, all of the above. So it's funny how that works out. Yeah. Well, I look forward to this matchup, hopefully with no controversial calls at the end of the game. so that way I can enjoy what the young Rockets look like,
And I look forward to it as well because, to be frank, we have had kind of an easy schedule. We started against Charlotte and we melted. We were kicking their ass and then we melted and somehow lost that game. Then we played 2 against San Antonio. And maybe San Antonio is a little bit better than people think. I think they might be if they stay healthy and don't tank. I think Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes next to Wemby is like competent basketball. I don't think they'll be good necessarily, but I think they'll be a little bit better than some like super tanker. But we played them twice. They're not, a contender or anything. We played Dallas, so that's a good team, and we beat Dallas. But we just played the Warriors without Steph, and we lost, right? So we've kind of had it easy, and we're only 3-3. So I would like to see them play, a legit, talented across the board team, Brunson, Cat, kind of see how they respond. One thing I'll say about these Rockets that I forgot to mention is, and I've pretty much implied it by now with the 31-point comeback, but they're never out of a game. So they did this last season. Obviously, like I said, they came back from 31 down against Golden State. They were down 20-something to San Antonio, and they came back and almost won that game. So they will come back from a deficit. Conversely, they will also choke a lead. I told you they blew an 18-point lead against Charlotte in the opener. They had a 20-something point lead against the Spurs in the second matchup, and they melted that and almost lost that game. And then they had 18, 20-point lead, something like that against the Mavs. And Dallas came back, and the Rockets fended them off. So I expect a close game either way.
For those watching on YouTube, I'm laughing because this sounds so much like the Knicks from 2 years ago. That like, if they built the big lead because they don't have the most efficient shooters like RJ and Randall, and I mean, you name it, like they were playing it with a true center at the time, they weren't able to build on big leads. And so like they'd get hot from 3 and then regress, and then teams would come back on them. Conversely, they would be down in a game, but because of a defensive floor that they could get to, they'd be able to get back into games and play close ones. So look, I expect a close game. I think it will justify the minutes that are played by the Knicks in this game as well, if it is close. And we'll see. This is a late game for us East Coasters, starting at 8:45 Eastern on Monday night. Shout out! Look, I like what the NBA did, just clearing out Election Day and then having this like everybody plays 15 minutes apart on the day before Election Day. So we'll see how much entertainment comes out of this day in the NBA as a whole. Roosh, I kept you longer than I said. Good. I apologize, and I appreciate you making the time for me this morning. Next time you're on, when the Rockets come to the Garden, there's a Mount Rushmore question that I usually ask people, which I'll tease it now, and then people can listen to the next one. But last year it was the Mount Rushmore of rivals. This year's the Mount Rushmore of villains, who are like the 4 sports figures that like are the boogeyman in Rockets history. I think I know one, but we'll get the other 3, or just see what your 4 are in the next time you're on. Before you get out of here, once again, tell the fine folks at home where they can find you and all of your stuff.
Yes. Hey, by the way, thank you. Love coming on. Always happy to come talk Rockets, Knicks, whatever hoops. Roosh Williams on Twitter. All the links are in my bio. Currently, I'm most active doing the Rockets Talk podcast with my partner, Frank. And yeah, so thanks for having me, man. Always happy to do it. And I hope the Rockets win. So we'll see.
I was going to say, I wish you personally the best of luck. I wish the Rockets very bad luck in this matchup against the Knicks on Monday night. Thank you for joining me, Roosh. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dig the show, head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video. Remember to subscribe. I will be back on Wednesday morning, regardless of what's happening in this country here in the United States of America. I am still recording a pregame pod on Tuesday, regardless, to preview Knicks Hawks. We'll see how that goes. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I will speak with you soon.